Nossa meta é restaurar 1 milhão de hectares. Mas o planeta Terra precisa muito mais. Nossa meta é restaurar 1 milhão de hectares. Mas o planeta Terra precisa muito mais para que a gente possa endereçar as principais crises que a humanidade vive hoje.
A re.green é uma empresa que busca fazer uma coisa: a restauração ecológica de alta qualidade em escala.
Nós fomos desafiados pelos investidores a criar modelos que parassem em pé financeiramente. Um choque, né? Opa, peraí, como é que eu faço uma floresta parar em pé economicamente?
Já fizemos vários reflorestamentos aqui. E a natureza, todo mundo depende dela, né? E quem cuida dela somos nós, né?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you all for being here and online on the Brazilians Coalition YouTube channel. We are the Climate Conference. We are the United Nations General Assembly. But rather than solely relying on the UNFCCC processes, we know that tangible transformations take place in the real world through collaborative efforts between government, civil society, and the private sector. The Brazilian Coalition is an example of this collaborative effort. It is a multi-stakeholder movement with more than 360 organizations between the private sector, financial sector, civil society, and academia. And here I want to emphasize the importance of the private sector. The economic transition requires at least $4 trillion a year if we want to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So these resources won't come solely from climate finance and donations from international community. It needs to come from proven sources. And we know that these resources are in the real world. So for this, the private sector needs to be our greatest ally. We see a growing receptivity from the private sector towards the green agenda. We see more and more business engaging into the decarbonization of our economy, something that we wouldn't be here at this stage probably 10 or 15 years ago. And as you know, we are really fortunate in Brazil because of our agro-environmental and nature-based solutions power and potential. We play an essential role in the global food, climate, and water security. Our country has the potential to lead this global transition. We have the world's largest tropical forest. We are the most biodiverse country on the planet. And we know, and that's why what the Brazilian coalition has been fighting, to reconcile production and environmental conservation. The next 2 years will be essential for Brazil, with G20 happening next year, and then COP30 in 2025. And it will be a great opportunity for us to deliver what we are called an integrated legacy for COP30. First, on nature, we need to reduce drastically deforestation. This is happening, but we need to assure that this will be a state policy that will be sustained. Second, on the economy pillar, we need to promote new incentives, new financial mechanisms to make the nature-based solutions a reality. And third, and probably the most important, the social pillar. We need people at the center of each and every strategy. We need to fight against hunger, and that relates to our role in food production. So our commitment on this road to COP needs to be a commitment on implementation. We know that there's no 1.5 without the Amazon standing. We know that there's no climate agenda without a development agenda. And we also know that there's no development without the private sector. So that's what this panel is for. And the Brazilian coalition is really excited to be part of this construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you all to be here. It's a pleasure to make this event with Coalizão, Brasil Clima e Floresta, and with re.green. Thank you, Bernardo, for the invitation. CEBDS is the Brazilian Business Council for Sustainable Development. We represent in Brazil the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So it's a global network. I was just yesterday with the president of the World Business to make this journey from Dubai this year to Belém in 2025. Brazil, I think, we are in such a special moment now. I've been in this field since 1997, working with climate change, and always climate change and biodiversity was so different worlds. And now we know, and everyone is pretty sure about that, the loss of biodiversity and emergency on climate change, they are so connected agendas. And to solve one, you have to think about other. And as Renata said, Brazil is in a very special position to solve both. That's why I think, to be here and to talk to you about what's happening in Brazil, the opportunities, is very important because we can provide solutions. I think there's one thing very different for developing countries, and I've been seeing so much events here. One is that we put social in the center, we put people in the center, and we also combine those two agendas. So being nature positive is so important as being facing tackle the effects of climate change. We have the most biodiversity in Brazil. Brazil has the potential of 15% of nature-based solutions. So it's, and 1/3% of the Paris Agreement can be achieved by nature-based solutions. So that's huge amount. And we have to have science on this. I think that's very recently, maybe in the last 5 years, that we have science more close, and I think Bernardo will show that as well, more close, that we have solutions, we can we can have integrity in the nature-based solution. So I think that's a very good moment. We have G20, as Renata said. We have the COP in 2025, COP 30 in Belém, the center of the Amazon, and there will be rich discussions. So we all invite you to be part of this journey. Thank you a lot.
Vijay Vaitheeswaran. I'm the Energy and Climate Innovation Editor of The Economist. It's my great pleasure to moderate our opening panel. I'll invite my distinguished panelists to come and join me on stage. And please give them a round of applause as they do. We have joining us Marcelo Behar, Vice President of Natura and Company. We will have joining us by Zoom, Catherine Martini, who's Head of Carbon Removal at Microsoft, Mariana Sarmiento, CEO of Terrasos, and Bernardo Strassburg, founder and co-CEO of re.green. So thank you to my distinguished panel for joining me this morning. Nearly a century ago, on the eve of India's independence from Britain, Mahatma Gandhi asked an important question. He asked, how many planets will it take if India, he asked, were to follow the same path of industrialization that Britain had already taken, that had consumed half the world's resources? How many planets? And we can recast that question today, still prescient, about how many planets worth of resources are we consuming on the pace of development, the path of development, and the answer, of course, is we have only one planet, and we need to take much better care of it and to think carefully and rethink our paradigms for development, and to go beyond that question to see the opportunity that the resource that nature provides. The entire modern economy rests on nature. And I learned quite a lot in my last couple of decades following this issue for The Economist from great thinkers like Amory Lovins, who co-authored Natural Capitalism, and the Nobel Prize winner Ken Arrow, and Gretchen Daly, who wrote about the value of nature, that we greatly undervalue nature in the way that modern business and markets and economics works. And part of what we have argued on our pages, but also what we need to do as part of this COP and climate process, we're here in New York during UN Climate Week, is to reimagine a form of development and capitalism that harnesses and invests in and grows the future for both people and planets. And so I think that's part of the reimagining that's taking place, part of what we want to dig into with our experts this morning. And how do we think about the role of business, of markets, of nature, as we head from this year, a COP in the Middle East, to a COP in Brazil? What are the new models that are emerging for rethink the question and the value of nature? And so with that as an opening frame, I want to ask my panelists, what do we need to do to change the mindset about how we interact with nature and see investment in natural resources, including as an approach to tackling climate as well as the broader biodiversity crisis? What have you seen that works? We'll get to some of the challenges, of course. There are challenges. We don't want to whitewash the greenwash, right? So we'll get to those in a moment. But lay out the case for me, because you're all at the cutting edge on this. Help us understand the opportunity here. Who wants to kick me off? Why don't you start us, Mariana?
So first of all, thank you for having me, for having Terrasos here. For those of you that don't know Terrasos is a...
Can you hear okay in the back? No? Okay, let's get a handheld mic here just in case, but please continue.
Terrasos is a Colombian company, and what we're known for today is because we've pioneered habitat banks and biodiversity credits in the compliance sector and the voluntary sector as well. Having said that, the way that, for us, it's recognizing that we all depend on nature, right? The economy depends on nature. The well-being of people in our countries depend on nature. So if we don't take care of it, our economies won't function, but also that brings social instability. And in our case, in Colombia, in Latin America, in some of the tropical belt countries, social stability is very much tied to how natural resources are managed. So it's not just an issue of, taking care of the environment, but also how do we create stable societies. So that's kind of what it is and why.
So you see this as really a societal question. And in your work, how do you think about the role of community and ecosystems? Because there's sometimes a narrow focus on just, say, the nature benefits or monetizing credits for international markets, and sometimes these are not sustainable. Can you talk about, because you engage on the ground with companies and communities, what have you learned about what works?
So when we talk about our projects, or we talk about what we do, is we want to generate exceptional conservation projects on the ground. And for us, what that means is that there needs to be technical rigor. So we need to be measuring, we need to be monitoring. It's a pay for success model, right? So we need to be able to show that we're delivering results. It needs to be financially sustainable, so we need to find a way to monetize that, but it needs to be legally and socially permanent for all of these investments and all of these things to actually make sense and to endure in the long term. So, how do you do that? If we just focus on the scientific component, and the communities don't buy into our projects, the chances of these projects failing is very high. So they just go hand in hand. For us, we won't get to our milestones and get paid if those communities around it don't work with the project and don't understand it. Practically speaking, what that means is that when we measure, we need to measure something that is relevant to local communities. Oftentimes we don't talk about carbon. We talk more about diversity of tree species or species that are relevant for those communities on the ground. So making sure that these projects are relatable to local communities.
So this is one of the, I think, long-standing lessons about how when you focus only on one side of the people and planet divide, either side, it tends to fall apart, right? We live in symbiosis, and that's going to be true for any of these approaches going forward. Now, we've gotten the view from the bottom up. Let's go from maybe the top down a little bit. Let me see, Marcelo. We've had a massive wave of interest in ESG investing around the world, trillions of euros particularly, right? It's led by Europe, but a global phenomena. Has the link been made to nature-based solutions, to connecting to nature sufficiently, or do we need to do more?
Let me see, is this working? Can you hear me well in the back? Yeah? Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for the organizers, re.green, CEBDS, Piazzon, many friends here. To your question, getting nature on the heart of ESG and how we build the case for nature and what we are witnessing. For those who don't know, I represent here Natura & Co., which is a company that was founded 50 years ago in Brazil. It was very much influenced by the first conference of the Earth Conference, the first COP that happened back in '92 in Brazil, when the company in Rio de Janeiro, it was a landmark in sustainability. And that's when the owners, the founders of Natura, decided to take biodiversity into everything, into the products, into how we build it, and decided to establish a long-term relationship with traditional communities. And we've been operating in the Amazon for the last 20 years, and then we form a global group with the Body Shop and Avon, and now we operate in over 100 countries with traditional communities, at least in 15 of them. And the Amazon case is really the one that we think should be enhanced and should become common practice for business. And how to do that? I think that's the question. And the main answer, I think, from everything we've seen, and sustainability and ESG can be a soup of acronyms with a lot of expertise needed to understand what each one of those stand for. So bear with me, I'll try to use very few acronyms, but those are important. So I think we should give the same discipline that we already gave for carbon, for nature. So for carbon, we set a whole framework. So science is well established with the scientific panel, IPCC. We have business committed with national levels for public policy under the Paris Agreement and its NDCs. So we know which country, where they're heading to, and how much they will be emitting. And business do their own carbon accountants under SBTI, under Science-Based Targets initiative, and we know the curve of abatement. We know how much we have to take down in the next few years, and we can relate that with finance, with TCFD. So we know how much exposure and risk the climate, the carbon agenda represents for business. We need to build the same discipline for nature. So we need a scientific panel creating common standards. What we have today is IPBS, an organism in Germany that's only 2 years old, but have not created yet the baseline for that. So that's the first piece that should be put in place. The second one is the national level, or the plan, so we can compare apples with apples, and we can see who's performing well, who's advancing, who's regenerating, who's really bringing nature back.
So you need some metrics, transparency, comparability?
Some comparability, and that's under COP15 from last year in Montreal. We had on our global framework of biodiversity new standards, 2 years for each country develop their own NBSEP. So that would be great, and I think Brazil should be a role model on building this new NBSEP. Then for business, we do have science-based targets for nature, SBTN, that should be the one that you can count and you can disclose what you're doing. And finally, yesterday, we launched the TNFD initiative, so connecting finance and nature, knowing that the exposure and the risk and the opportunities, and here we are in a field of opportunities. We have two amazing new businesses that are regenerating nature, that are bringing nature back. So we have a very practical case on how this can be disclosed and counted by investors to enforce and to enhance that model. I think organizing that framework will be the next chapter.
Okay, so the connection you make to the investment community and the capital that is looking for these sorts of solutions is there are real-world business examples, several decades of work in the field, the data, the verification, some of the independent bodies, the SBTI process. So you're connecting it to a global process, and through that to give confidence to investors that this is something that's serious, that's credible. Because of course there are questions. We want to come to that. In fact, why don't I turn to the man in the hot seat now, Bernardo. Can you help us come to grips with what at the moment is a bit of a dicey moment for nature-based solutions? The august New York Times ran a piece a couple of weeks ago suggesting that trees are not our friends, casting some doubts on this process and this industry, really. What is your rebuttal? I think you have a perspective on this.
Of course. Thank you, Vijay. Can you hear me properly at the back? Great, if you could hold. Well, first of all, thank you for the panelists. Thank you, Vijay, for accepting the invitation. Especially thank you all to be here. We know so many competing interesting events, and we're actually even competing with our own president in Brazil right now, speaking next door. So thank you so much for choosing to be here.
I think is the word. Not
very, very good. So one element that we hear quite often now, and as a criticism to nature-based solutions, relates to, in a warming world, nature catches fire in a simplified way, and that tree plantings, trees die. And very smart people, one person I admire a lot, Bill Gates, wrote that on his book. The New York Times, another institution I really admire, recently wrote, same argument, planting trees are not a solution to climate change, because you plant the tree, 20, 30, 40 years old, that tree dies, it goes back to the atmosphere, or fires will take it. And I think that's a shallow criticism in a way that, yes, planting trees in simplifying monoculture as a quick fix to climate change it's not a solution. That's why we don't talk at re.green about planting trees. We restore forests, and here it's really, really crucial difference. And at re.green, every single project we do, it's a 5-star ecological restoration project according to the Society for Ecological Restoration standard. What does that mean? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, they are all important, but the 5-star ecological restoration are projects where you fully restore the forest's processes. One of the key processes of a forest is regeneration. A forest, of course, in the Amazon, it catches fire eventually, it grows back. That resilience, that capacity to come back is inherent to a forest with all the processes restored. And this is a crucial argument for permanence. We're not planting trees, we're restoring forests. Forests will come back, and they are part of a long-term solution. And this is really a case where, borrowing the old adage, we can't really miss the forest for the trees. It will be, as Marina mentioned before.
Yeah, you managed to get in the line that it's all on our minds. But I'm going to stop you there. You've taken on the question of permanence, right? This is one of the challenges that nature-based solutions have, with a very interesting argument, right? So it is not monocultures, not the quick fix, as it were, but thinking longer term, thinking about the entire ecosystem, 5-star ratings. That's asking an awful lot, right? In real life, because permanence, in order to deal with climate change, we're not just looking at a century, but you want much longer time frames. You need to have, in addition to very good governance and practices today, some methods for verification, monitoring, continuation, to make sure that the next generation and the next will also maintain those forests. And so how does one come into that? Now, the same questions can be asked, and I will in a moment, of our panelists from Microsoft about other permanence across different investments that they make. But in this area, what have you proposed to people you work with, or have you seen in practice for the longer term permanence? What systems can we set up that would give us some confidence that this is not something that'll just last 10 or 20 years, and a change of government or a change of development priorities or acts of God may change the carbon situation and the picture?
That's absolutely a crucial point. And I would say there are 2 elements here. There's a policy element, very happy to see Governor Elder here, which is let's strengthen the public sector role in guaranteeing the permanence of protected areas or similar areas where you do a conservation easement, and then you do have a role for the government to play in ensuring you become a partner with the government to help ensure there are legal obligations. So there are many methods we can make it really hard, legally speaking, for those forests to be cut down. So that's one element. So making it really hard, be it with a strong governance system. The other one, you both touched upon this, is really partnering with the local communities. And the permanence angle related to this is, if we're restoring that area, it means obviously it was degraded in the first place for some reason. We really need to understand that landscape, that territory, work with the people there, understanding what were the motivations, the incentives, the needs that took to the degradation of that area, and carefully, jointly tackle each one of those and make sure whatever we're rebuilding back also thinking on how the community will have a long-term interest in that standing forest. So one part of the answer, make it really hard legally for that to be reversed, be a partner of the government in this in a way that if the government reverse courses, it will also be serious consequence for the government in terms of reputation. The other one, with the local custodians of the land, work hand in hand with them, make sure they are on this with a win-win for the long term.
So you really need a comprehensive approach, is what I'm hearing, right? And then you can have confidence. Great. Okay, so let me turn to our visitor from the ether. Catherine, how are you? I hope you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Terrific, terrific. So you may not be able to see them, but you're speaking to a packed hall that's hanging on every word that you're about to tell us. Now, you work for a very interesting company that not only has Microsoft committed to ambitious climate goals, a lot of companies talk about net zero, but you're committed to going well beyond net zero, to really removing all the emissions, legacy emissions, and that of course requires commitment to negative emissions approaches. And across the company, you've been making some quite interesting investments, even early first mover type investments in engineered solutions, in carbon dioxide removal approaches. Recently, I think with some forms of mineralization, we saw some interest expressed. But you're in charge of the nature-based solutions area. Can you give us a sense of perspective of how your company, which takes a portfolio approach, views nature-based solutions in the context of the other alternatives that are on the table? Give us a bit of either a pro and con, or maybe what does each bring to the table that a company like yours that wants a lot of tools in your toolkit, where do nature-based solutions fit in for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers and Bernardo for the invitation, and to all the wonderful tech people that have allowed me to join remotely. So thank you so much for that. You've made my job easy here in terms of an intro. Some people might be wondering, why is Microsoft on this panel? And a big piece of it is Microsoft does have these ambitious climate goals to be carbon negative by 2030, to remediate all of our historical emissions back to the company's founding from 1975. As you mentioned, we take a portfolio approach right now. The majority of that portfolio approach in the carbon removal space is nature-based, because that's what's available in the market, right? The engineered carbon removal market doesn't really exist yet. It's getting there. We're signing some of our first deals, and Microsoft is of the thinking that those who can do more should do more. We've had an internal carbon fee for a number of decades now that helps finance this work, and it's very important, as Bernardo and other panelists have said, to preserve the trees that are standing and make resilient forests, that it's not just about planting trees on the forestry spectrum. Of course, in the nature-based space, we do a whole variety of investments across soil carbon and improved forest management, agricultural, regenerative agricultural, agroforestry, etc. But I think what's really important is twofold. First, that the state of the current voluntary carbon removal market is nearly entirely nature-based. And then secondly, thinking about some strategic purchases in the engineered space about how we can create the market we want to see. And on the nature-based space, the same thinking would apply to the engineered space. While the majority of the voluntary carbon market right now might be nature-based, what's the nature-based carbon market we want to see in 2030 and 2050? What does the quality look like in that? What do the MRV tools look like? How can we build trust and credibility in this space? So those are the types of things that I think Microsoft is uniquely positioned as a technology company to help and to be able to take a keen eye to.
Well, Catherine, you asked the most important question. What do we need to do to have that kind of marketplace in 2030 to 2050? Give us an answer. What do you need to see specifically, or what would you like to see the trust in these markets that at the moment is lacking?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I had my wish list, I think it would be working on, how can we unblock other corporate entities from entering this space, right? We've heard in the opening that the nature-based space plays a huge part in the global community achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. And right now, I think corporates are best positioned to be able to deploy money quickly within the timeframes of the IPCC scenarios for 1.5. I have no doubt that, the compliance market and countries will get there. So the question is, what's blocking other corporates from entering this nature-based space? And I think a lot of that has to do with reputational risks. There's a lot of low-quality credits out there. There's a lot of lack of understanding from traditional financiers in terms of what makes a good nature-based credit. How long are these investments? Why do they require so much upfront capital? Just by the nature of how trees grow, they're not going to start throwing off credits. Carbon removal significantly, for 5 to 7 years, but you need a lot of capital up front to either acquire land, plant the trees, get the seeds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're not going to see a return on investment for some time. So, we need patient capital, and we need capital that, maybe has a little bit higher risk tolerance, as well as more communication between the nature-based space and traditional financiers.
Great. I saw, Bernardo, you were shaking your head positively with a lot of the comments that Catherine was making. Let me put this question to you, and I open it up to anyone else that wants to answer. When we look ahead to the vision that we've just heard of the next 10, 20, 30 years, what needs to happen for the marketplace to evolve in the direction and grow as people hope it does? Catherine gave an answer from the corporate perspective. How do we remove obstacles to getting more capital from the private sector? But what about the integrity of the markets themselves? What is the role, for example, that we could see technology play in helping with some of the verification questions? Now, we've lived through the last 10, 20 years of a telecommunications revolution. There's a satellite revolution. We know the Internet of Things, the cost of sensors has collapsed to almost zero. Everything is wired up. Why not turn the IoT into the Internet of Trees, whereby you will know if your investment has burned down or not, or is being restored? What would it take for satellite-based and drone-based and other technologies that are being applied in other areas, other industries? Petroleum, for example, uses these extensively to monitor methane and so on, which is an environmental good. Are we there yet with the technology and the potential investment to provide the support for the measurement, the verification that you talked about earlier? Or is this too hard or too expensive or too fiddly, and probably that's not the way that things are going to unfold?
Thank you. That's definitely the way things will evolve. I'm very optimistic. I think we're at the cusp of a revolution in terms of the costs. Can you hear me without? No?
A little higher. Yeah, please use that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I use this. I believe we're on the cusp of a revolution in our ability to monitor, to report. Obviously, AI will have a major role to play. We already use AI. re.green, for instance, has a land classification algorithm. They use machine learning. And we do that for over 5 years. Now, that's pales in comparison to what we're going to have in 2-3 years down the line. So I'm very optimistic that our ability to monitor, to trace, we're already able to monitor individual trees over a very expansive area. And we're moving into monitoring of biodiversity and other elements quite fast as well. There's an X Prize this year, which is quite exciting, promoting innovative ways to monitor biodiversity. But as a scientist, I would say, and Marcelo put it very nicely, how we build the enabling conditions for the market, for the carbon market to thrive. And I would say one of the key enabling conditions for nature-based solutions in general to thrive, it's concerted effort in R&D related to nature-based solutions across the board. This is research and development on how to improve cost effectiveness and efficiency and survival rates and success rates of nature-based solutions. That's a whole area of research on social aspects of nature-based solutions, poorly, severely under-researched. There's the element of disruption, creating new markets, valuing. There's a role for economics research in this. So
there's a rich potential, you see.
There's a rich potential. We're going to get there on the monitoring, I think, is the one we're closer to. But there are, I would say, we usually compare in Brazil, the restoration cost effectiveness is where the monoculture of eucalyptus were 40 years ago.
Right.
And with 40 years of investment, there was an 11-fold increase in productivity, survival rates. We can replicate that for the growth rates, for the social elements, and everything. And as a chief scientist, re.green now, we're bound to launch the most ambitious nature-based solutions research and development program in the world. And we actually invite, and we're going to do it in an open collaborative way. So we're very eager to share that in the coming months. We'll hope to crystallize the nature-based solutions scientific revolution.
Fantastic. And picking up on your point about collaboration, I'm going to open to the audience for our crowdsourced wisdom here. Let's get a couple of questions for our gurus on stage. We'll have a microphone making the rounds. Please put your hand up. Let me know. There's a gentleman quickly in the corner there who's come up with his hand. Please identify yourself and your affiliation, sir, and make it a good question. No pressure at all.
Dan, we always give you a good question.
I can do at least the first two parts of that. My name's Dan Zarin. I lead the Forests and Climate Change program at WCS, the Wildlife Conservation Society. Thanks for a great panel. It's great to catch up with old friends and hear what's going on. I guess my question is primarily to Bernardo, but others as well. The scale of the challenge is enormous. In Brazil alone, along the arc of deforestation, there are hundreds of thousands of square kilometers that are needing restoration because they've been deforested. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of that are on public land. We understand that the carbon dynamics of forests, even away from those, have shifted in part because of climate change that's been induced by the loss of that forest cover. What do you see as the prospects for actually being able to address that problem at the scale that it exists, rather than at the small scale at which it's currently being addressed in practice, rather than in the kind of rhetoric of all of these pledges going on all over the world? Thank you.
It's a tough challenge there. What's the answer?
Indeed. Thanks, Dan. Can you hear me properly? And thank you for bringing the attention to the scale element. I mean, when designing re.green, that was the one word we had written on the wall all the time. So I believe in Brazil and elsewhere in the tropics, we're being technically capable of restoring very well a forest for a long time now. We, at least for over 25 years, we know how to restore. We know how to restore at small scales. That's really important. I always like to highlight this. Small-scale restoration as small-scale agriculture and family farming is crucial and should go on. But as in farming, to provide effective solutions at the scale we need, we also need to focus on how to bring about not tens of millions of hectares, but potentially 1 billion hectares worldwide. I was part of the team that co-drafted the Target 2 of the new Global Biodiversity Framework, where we collectively agreed to restore 30% of degraded lands globally. The central estimate for that is 1 billion hectares. That's the continental United States. And that's what we plan to do as a collective global society over the next 10 years. Quick answer to that, we need to tap into nature's potential to restore itself. A very large fraction of that will come through assisted natural regeneration, so no tree planting,
right,
or occasional tree planting. And at re.green we work with all these models. But on a positive note, Dan, you know that very well, there have been historical examples of very large-scale restoration as percentage of countries happening before. Costa Rica, South Korea, all of them saw over 10, 20, in one case, 30% of the surface area of the country being restored. And that's way before carbon markets or any of the other incentives.
So we can be ambitious, but it might require different approaches and working with nature, as it were.
Absolutely. We can. We did it.
We did it.
Some
There's
places,
an example of it.
And now it's a concerted effort, and that's a societal challenge.
Sure.
That science, that government, that's business together, we can achieve that.
Okay. Do we have a question?
On the scale question, just to add 2 quick points to what Bernardo said. This is exactly what I face every day in my job. The scale of this challenge is absolutely enormous. I'm glad it's been singled in on. Microsoft has been procuring 1 to 1.5 million tons of carbon removal per year for the last 3 years. We're one of the largest carbon removal procurers in the market, and we need to scale to 5 million or more tons by 2030. And that's just one corporate buyer, right? And so it's like, how do you do that? How in the forestry space, the nature-based space, do you get all of the right players together for that? And as Bernardo said, the technology here isn't new. We know how to plant trees, we know how to manage forests. It's the human piece here. It's the enabling environments, the governments, the policy, Vera certifications, how can we do more grouped projects faster? But the key piece I really want to touch on is the people factor. I think it's getting the right implementation partners together with critical scientists, amazing implementation teams, as well as making sure local communities are consulted, and also that there's a diverse set of voices in the room, right? This part of the carbon removal getting to that scale is still so small that 2 or 3 people can really make a big difference in history here. And so if there are voices that you don't see in, I implore you and invite you to bring them into the conversation. You know, 1, 2, 3 individuals can still make a really big difference here in gathering the right diverse set of voices to make massive scale projects that we need in terms of pivoting this. We haven't been able to unlock it yet, so we need a more larger diversity of voices in the room to get there, to get to that scale.
Thank you, Catherine. Now we have a question right here in the front. One quick question I think we have time for.
My name is Sven Anderson. I'm a greenhouse gas accountant and CEO of Greenhouse Gas Accounting Service. In my daily work of reviewing independently sustainability investments, I see one big fail. And that's also a topic that Marina brought on at the beginning of the panel's people. There's people living in forests, there's people living off forests, there's people living around forests, and all the instruments that are there currently are failing them terribly. And so my question is to the panel, because we haven't talked about it, how do you feel how this could be fixed?
Marcelo, you want to jump in?
Do you want to go first?
Mariana, why don't you start?
I think, part of the issue is that we focus on projects and not on landscapes.
Sorry, we need the microphone here.
So I think part of the issue is that we're focusing on projects and not on landscapes. So it's not just about how do you get your project right, but how do you promote a sustainable landscape through the different projects that you do on the ground. And that ties into some of the permanence questions, right? When we talk about these projects, we can't ignore people and we can't ignore land tenure issues. If we can't think about land tenure security for 30 years, then it's just a project, right? So it is really changing the mindset from a project to a landscape, and when you're on the ground, it's how do you build that landscape? So what are not just the planting trees, but then, okay, what other types of investments do I need to make so that these communities and these landowners can actually derive income from biodiversity conservation or from non-timber forest products, right? And Behar is a wonderful example where you have a non-timber forest economy, and now the question is how can we begin to monetize that forest with carbon credits, with biodiversity credits, and really create sustainable landscapes. So, I think that's part of it. Just it's amplifying a little bit that view.
Please.
Yeah. So just to add, to that, I think it's the central question, because that's where nature is in danger, and where nature can be recovered is working with traditional communities that have many different names in different geographies. But just to make a quick observation, first there is a false dilemma that regenerative agriculture is just shifting from traditional monoculture into small landholders. We have to incorporate traditional communities into that prism. So it's a third part, and it's a different approach with 3 elements: carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and certainly access for benefit sharing. Unless we use the instruments that are available in the Nagoya Protocol to work with them and to share, and so they can receive and they can understand and value the work that is doing, nothing will really change. So I think it will be a combo, and those elements are already in place to be put together.
I've been informed we actually have time for another question if we have one from the floor. This is your chance to grill our gurus on something you've heard. If not, I have my own questions, not to worry. Well, you think about, let's see, there's a gentleman there. Give him a gold star and let's get him a microphone.
Uti Agarwal from VP. Just a simple question for the panel. What's the price point that you would need to make these projects feasible and sustainable over the long term?
My mic doesn't work.
We'll get one to you.
Yeah, okay. So again, we work in biodiversity, right? We have 8 projects on the ground. Our largest project is 1,000 hectares. Our smallest project is 100 hectares. And all our projects are structured and designed for 30 years, which is why we think, biodiversity credits are really interesting, because we're working in at scales in which carbon projects would just never work financially. And then you get into the question of pricing. How do we price biodiversity credits? For us, it's the cost of maintenance, the cost of implementation plus the cost of maintenance plus the cost of capital. That gives us the value of our credit. And the effect that has is that each project, depending on the type of ecosystem, depending on the type of, depending on the land value, will have different prices. We cater to the compliance market, which is the companies that have to compensate biodiversity impacts, and they have to apply the mitigation hierarchy, and they have to be within the same watershed and the same ecosystem. So we have some areas where credits might be $10,000, $12,000, and that's 1 hectare for 30 years. Okay? We have others that are 8,000. But again, it depends on the ecosystem. It depends on the scale of the project. So yeah, and then when we take it to the voluntary, which is the experiment that we've been doing in the last 2 years, we said, okay, one is the compliance market, but if we were to take the biodiversity credit market to the voluntary space, how do we do that, and what's the right price point? So we looked at what was around willingness to pay, and the answer was more or less $20. So we're like, okay, we really want to maintain our 30-year value proposition. That for us was non-negotiable. So we said, okay, so I guess we just need to scale down the size. So for us right now, we're selling voluntary biodiversity credits. Each one represents 10 square meters, so about the size of this, for 30 years. And we're selling them at between $20 to $30.
So you've got the price. She's got 10 square meters for you. Meet her afterwards. We can make a deal. Any other thoughts on pricing and sort of the economics of the markets as they stand now?
Briefly on the carbon pricing element of that. re.green now has a pipeline of about 1.7 million hectares of projects, potential areas to go into. And the carbon price to make those valuables vary from $10 per ton to $48 per ton. That's basically a combination of the opportunity cost of the land, very remote, degraded, low productivity pasture land, prime frontier for pulp and paper, and some of those are really important areas for biodiversity. We talk a lot about the Amazon, and we're definitely restoring the Amazon. Brazil has another forest biome, which is the Atlantic forest biome, and 85% of it is gone. So restoration is really a lifeboat for species on the brink of extinction there. But it happens to be a more expensive place to, so there's a land element, and then there's a restoration intervention element. So we mentioned here assisted natural regeneration, relatively cheap, all the way to full planting. We always maintain our projects for 30 to 50 years, so that increases the cost. but we believe adaptive management is really important in the restoration space. It's a long-term initiative. So $10 to $48 depending on. But the beauty of it is nature has much more to offer than carbon. Mariana, it's mentioned biodiversity. We're looking into this. We are looking into the sustainable management of a myriad of forest products. Natura is a leader on this. And then when you start combining different revenues, potential revenues, that carbon cutoff price lowers. So one of the crucial elements of the entire re.green business plan is this platform of multitude of potential revenue streams from the basket of incentives that our forests provide us.
What would be the impact if we were to see the emergence of a global carbon price? Now, I know this sounds crazy. For 25 years, I've been writing editorials in The Economist arguing the externalities involved with climate change, the market failures, the need for global carbon pricing. Most of the time, we were treated as Martians, as are most economists that think about this issue. But of course, it is happening bit by bit. In Europe, most notably, with a strong carbon price. But according to the World Bank, nearly a third of the global economy's output is covered by some kind of carbon pricing. Not very high in some places, but nevertheless, stepping stones. We have the new CBAM, the European approach to carbon border adjustment, which may see its reflection in other countries following with some form of carbon pricing or trying to avoid carbon dumping. So one can see coalitions of the willing emerging, or carbon clubs. If we look ahead a decade to a world with a meaningful global carbon price, how does that affect investments in nature-based solutions?
I'd love to take that one.
Sure, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think these are great questions. Earlier, I spoke about the need to move and unblock access to finance and capital, but I think Mariana touched on a really great concept of willingness to pay. No matter what the price is, prices are always going to be a moving target depending on inflation and whatever's happening in the global economy. If we get a global carbon price, there will be more finance, which is great. But I think there's always going to be a place for higher quality. And so how do you increase the willingness to pay for purchasers that also returns capital back to local communities who are doing this work, whose land this is, who's generating this wealth, right? So for me, that's credibility, trust, and clarity. How can you prove in the market that you have a high quality nature-based carbon removal credit? Why would somebody be willing to pay more for higher quality? If we get a global price on carbon, there's still going to be a ton of junk credits out there that are just monoculture plantations. That doesn't mean that we've done anything for regeneration or resiliency. So I think the biggest piece for me, when optimistically that global carbon price comes, is to ensure that all the pieces and work in the background have been done to ensure that high quality credits can ensure a high price for willingness to pay with credibility, trust, and clarity. A lot of that has to do with MRV.
Thank you. Marcelo?
Yeah, I think so. First, there is another phase, I think a bit false dilemma, which is Global North producing removals and carbon capture solutions, and mega biodiverse countries producing nature-based solutions. And as if we could choose between one or the other. For the challenges that we have ahead, and for if you make the accountants of all the NDCs together, we will need all those solutions together. So carbon price will come from the mix of those solutions, knowing that a solution can deliver carbon removal, but also other dimensions. So whenever we make our accountancy on carbon for Natura & Co, and we are intense in emissions as well. We emit over 2 million tons per year, and we make our plans of reduction. We need a solution will do the carbon reduction, but also what we'll create in terms of nature and the social aspect of regeneration that the carbon can create. So high integrity, it's not only a must, it's something that will allow the carbon market to be comparable not only on the carbon dimension, but taking the other dimensions into account as well. I don't think there will be a carbon market independent from nature side, nor independent from the social side. So certainly those elements will get connected, and within 10 years we'll know if the carbon is the credit is carbon positive, but also nature positive, and what it plays for social capacity. So that's how we see the future.
Well, that's great. That's a good note to end on, one that captures the opportunity ahead, but also broadens the frame. That we're looking to co-benefits, looking to the ecosystem, and connecting one form of tackling the challenge with others, right? We cannot look in silos. That's sometimes been part of the problem, is people tend to look in their own silos and to throw rocks at the people in the other silo. And so I think we see a much more integrated, and I think honestly, more pragmatic approach, acknowledging some of the current challenges, but also pointing to ways that we can address them. So I think we should give our panel a round of thanks for their wonderful contributions. Thank you very much, and thank all of you. Thank you. Please.
Oh man, it's cold.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to switch to Portuguese now, so for those of you that don't speak the language, we have a translation device on your tables. É prazer estar aqui hoje. Eu sou o Thiago Piccolo da re.green e a gente agora vai fazer a conclusão desse nosso evento. A ideia do evento sempre foi trazer perspectivas bem diversas e amplas de atores diferentes sobre esse negócio da natureza, né, o Business Case for Nature. E eu estou muito feliz de convidar hoje aqui para participar desse fechamento o governador do Pará, o senhor Helder Barbalho. Muito obrigado, governador, por estar presente aqui com a gente hoje, na agenda tão atribulada. Vocês podem me ouvir? Está funcionando bem? Bom, governador, a ideia aqui é a gente fazer algumas poucas perguntas nesses últimos 15 minutos que nos restam. Eu queria começar falando da COP30, que parece uma oportunidade ideal para o Brasil liderar um debate global. E eu acho que com esse protagonismo vem também, né, uma responsabilização e um compromisso maior com a agenda climática. Falando de negócio, que é o nosso foco aqui hoje, a oportunidade de ser anfitrião de um evento como esse traz que tipo de oportunidades de negócio para empresas que estão inseridas na bioeconomia do Brasil e que tipo de oportunidades para a população do estado do Pará?
Primeiro, Thiago, muito obrigado pela oportunidade. Dividir esse painel com você, para mim, é uma grande satisfação. Cumprimentar, agradecer a re.green, a coalizão, a CEBDS, pelo convite de poder estar aqui e dizer que a palavra oportunidade certamente deve ser vista por todos os brasileiros e particularmente pelos paraenses como um momento único a partir do destaque de termos a escolha de Belém, o estado do Pará, como sede do maior evento político do planeta e particularmente a partir da agenda das urgências climáticas que será a COP30 em 2025. A agenda ambiental, ela coloca e tira o Brasil da diplomacia global e do protagonismo que o nosso país pode exercer. Lembrando que nos últimos 4 anos o Brasil viveu momentos difíceis no trato com esta agenda. E isto fez com que o nosso país não apenas regredisse nesta construção, como questionasse o nível de responsabilidade do nosso país. Virada esta página, neste momento o Brasil surge reposicionado com o olhar do planeta para saber qual a efetiva capacidade do nosso país de lidar com este desafio. Os estados subnacionais têm um papel decisivo, inclusive nos últimos 4 anos, pelo vácuo deixado na institucionalidade brasileira, acabou se posicionando num papel extremamente relevante. E destaco, claro, o estado do Pará, que nesses últimos 4 anos construiu, a partir do início de 2019, com a política estadual de mudanças do clima e desdobrando com agendas diversas que chegam no chamamento e na construção do ambiente de negócios com previsibilidade, com segurança jurídica e com a construção das condições para que o mundo dos negócios veja os negócios verdes como uma grande nova vocação para a Amazônia, uma grande nova vocação para o Brasil, de maneira muito especial. Nós temos até 2025 que, primeiro, entregar um ambiente de um país que não lide e não dialogue com qualquer ilegalidade ambiental. Este é um ponto absolutamente inegociável. O Brasil não pode chegar em 2025 com desmatamento ilegal. O Brasil precisa apresentar condições de um combate efetivo e os números nos projetam que seremos capazes disto. Todos que acompanham os dados verificam que efetivamente as reduções do desmatamento no nosso país têm sido bastante significativas e particularmente o estado do Pará. Destaco o último mês de agosto, nós reduzimos em 70% o desmatamento comparado com agosto de 2022. Os primeiros 18 dias de setembro, nós reduzimos em 78% com o mesmo período do ano anterior. Portanto, vamos fechar o ano de 2023 com uma importante entrega nesta agenda. Mas esta é a agenda do comando, do controle e da fiscalização. Sem isto não vamos adiante, mas apenas com isto também não vamos adiante. Nós precisamos propor a transição do uso do solo, a transição do modelo econômico para a Amazônia. E o modelo econômico para a Amazônia, que pode emergir a partir deste cenário de COP, deste cenário de convergência da agenda da sustentabilidade, este cenário oportuno, lamentavelmente uma oportunidade fruto da urgência climática, é a agenda Floresta Viva. E Floresta Viva deve ser vista como biodiversidade, como bioeconomia, mas deve ser vista também dentro da lógica das concessões das áreas florestais, das concessões de restauro, das áreas privadas de restauro, das áreas não destinadas para restauro, para que o Brasil possa ser capaz de entregar as suas metas. É importante que nós possamos ter a compreensão de que não se pode imaginar que apenas combatendo o desmatamento nós vamos garantir zerar as nossas emissões. Os níveis da urgência posta hoje necessitam com que freiemos o desmatamento e busquemos restabelecer as áreas antropizadas. E aí aparece certamente uma grande oportunidade para a iniciativa privada. O Estado do Pará construiu as bases legais para a sua política de restauro dentro da política estadual de mudanças do clima, dentro do programa Amazônia Agora, que é a parte da execução do plano estadual de mudanças climáticas, e tem uma meta ousada. Nós estabelecemos que até 2030 a intenção é que o Estado possa restaurar 5,65 milhões de hectares, e isto não quer dizer que o poder público irá restaurar áreas. Quer dizer que o poder público estará fazendo um chamamento para a iniciativa privada, construindo a ambiência necessária para que o privado possa fazê-lo. Possa fazê-lo privado com privado? Sim. Possa fazer privado com público? Também. Nós estamos na busca para que ainda este ano lancemos o primeiro edital de concessão de áreas de restauro do Estado, e é muito simbólico, inclusive, esta primeira concessão, porque é uma área grilada de proteção ambiental, num dos territórios com maior conflito fundiário e conflito ambiental do Estado, que é o município de São Félix do Xingu, que historicamente é o município que mais emitiu gás de efeito estufa na Amazônia. Nós recuperamos esta área, restabelecemos o domínio, fizemos o estudo do bioma e agora estamos estruturando para fazer a primeira concessão de restauro. Eu faço este destaque por compreender, primeiro, de que esta agenda do restauro irá permitir com que nós possamos fazer o balanço necessário para zerar os níveis de emissão no Estado. O restauro, como todos sabem, é um processo muito menos questionado na captura do carbono e na precificação do carbono, portanto, com possibilidades reais de uma monetização maior, de uma valoração maior. Agora, para tal, é a conciliação. O Estado deve e não pode abrir mão disto, combater ilegalidade e garantir segurança jurídica. Seja segurança legislativa, seja segurança para evitar conflito fundiário, evitar ocupação, evitar queimadas, evitar desmatamento em áreas que estão ou privadas para uso de restauro ou de preservação de floresta, seja áreas públicas que foram restauradas ou estejam em processo de restauro. Por outro lado, cabe ao privado colaborar para que nós possamos ganhar escala. Sem o privado, nós não vamos garantir com que nós tenhamos oportunidade de chegar aos níveis que são as metas estaduais, que são as metas nacionais e que são as metas globais diante das urgências que estão colocadas para que não cheguemos nos níveis que já são alarmantes de mudanças do clima que estamos assistindo. Mas a palavra, acima de tudo, voltando para a agenda COP, nós temos uma oportunidade única de deixar um legado que estruture floresta viva com uma nova grande vocação para a nossa região. Nós não podemos mais continuar, e isto é um processo transitório por se tratar inclusive de um processo cultural, em que floresta por um tempo, há algumas décadas passadas, se transformou em um obstáculo para o desenvolvimento. Isto ficou para o passado. A partir de agora, mesmo que tardiamente, para esta geração e para as futuras gerações, floresta precisa ser vista como a nova grande oportunidade. Por um lado, para garantir o equilíbrio do clima, para dar a contribuição ao planeta, mas, acima de tudo, não apenas por este olhar, mas pelo olhar do negócio, da oportunidade de assistir a partir das concessões, a partir da atividade do restauro, a partir do mercado de carbono, incrementado ao estudo da biodiversidade para a implementação de bioeconomia, nós possamos oportunizar atividades econômicas diversas voltadas à floresta viva.
E governador, pegando um gancho nesse último ponto que o senhor fez, como que a opinião pública hoje no estado do Pará percebe essa oportunidade e o que precisa acontecer para que a gente conecte de forma mais ampla, além dessa sala aqui, né, o nosso país, a nossa população com essa oportunidade que a gente tem na economia verde?
É fundamental, primeiro, que nós possamos mostrar pelo exemplo de que não é possível mais conviver com ilegalidade ambiental. E acho que isto está num processo bastante avançado de amadurecimento. A sociedade, em sua maior parte, compreende de que combater ilegalidade ambiental, preservação da floresta, preservação da Amazônia, ela é decisiva para a humanidade. O que nós não podemos é deixar de colocar como relevante é de que a nossa região, historicamente, esteve voltada às suas atividades econômicas ao uso do solo. E foram usos do solo extrativistas, usos do solo que, por alguma razão, ou pelo modelo estabelecido, acabaram por extrair a floresta. E estas atividades ainda são profundamente relevantes para a geração de emprego, para oportunizar com que haja a condição de sustento social da região. Por isso que eu sempre tenho dito nas minhas falas, comando e controle decisivo, e sem isto nós não vamos adiante. Mas apenas com comando e controle, com fiscalização, nós também não vamos adiante. Nós precisamos ter o braço da transição do uso do solo para que não haja um conflito, partindo da premissa de que o cidadão, ele deseja a floresta viva, mas ele não pode ser colocado à prova de que floresta viva represente sociedade pobre. Nós precisamos que haja a conciliação deste processo, para que ele seja sustentável. Por isso eu sempre costumo dizer, tem que ser sustentável ambientalmente, mas ele precisa ser sustentável social e economicamente. Nós temos na Amazônia brasileira mais de 29 milhões de pessoas que precisam de emprego, que precisam de renda, que precisam de oportunidade, de sustento e de vida. E aí, se nós não construirmos um ambiente que esteja interligado, certamente, em algum momento, e não demorará, nós vamos viver um choque que resultará numa perda de energia e numa perda de eficácia na estratégia de contenção do desmatamento. Mas eu queria destacar, Tiago, que é muito importante que nós possamos fazer um chamamento ao processo de financiamento. Nós temos que fazer um chamamento à construção de uma oportunidade de negócios. Muitos defendem, e eu tive ontem, inclusive, a oportunidade de dividir uma plenária com o secretário para o clima dos Estados Unidos, o secretário Kerry, em que a floresta amazônica e o sul global devem dar a sua contribuição. Nós estamos dispostos a dar a nossa contribuição. Mas vamos colocar na mesa quantos por cento o desmatamento da Amazônia representa para as emissões do planeta. Os dados que me chegam é de que representa 10%. Se representam 10%, é o desmatamento da floresta o grande algoz do desequilíbrio climático? Não. Ok. Mas isto não quer dizer que nós não queiramos mudar o nosso processo de ocupação do solo. O que nós queremos é que haja financiamento para que estes 10% de contribuição fruto do desmatamento seja eliminado a partir da valoração da floresta viva. E como nós vamos valorar a floresta viva? Com biodiversidade, com financiamento para pesquisa, para a ciência, para a tecnologia, para fazer com que a nossa biodiversidade agregue valor e nós possamos ter uma nova vocação. Como vamos fazer com que o mercado de carbono seja um mercado em que efetivamente haja uma valoração, em que floresta viva possa valer mais do que floresta morta? E esta é uma realidade que hoje, lamentavelmente, não se assiste. Por isso, a mobilização da iniciativa privada é decisiva nesse processo, porque será a iniciativa privada que estará construindo esta transição de modelo e esta transação econômica, transformando floresta e captura de carbono numa nova commodity. Portanto, eu compreendo de que a sociedade ela está pronta para isto. Ela amadureceu, ela compreende, abstraindo um nicho muito periférico que ainda imagina que é possível dialogar apenas no seu espectro. Mas se nós formos analisar, até aqueles que em tese são os maiores, os de agenda de maior conflito, hoje no Pará, por exemplo, quem tem uma relação mais conflituosa com a floresta é a pecuária. A pecuária, hoje, ela está relacionada a um mercado que é internacional, a uma commodity internacional. A maior parte da produção no meu estado dialoga com a indústria da carne de compradores que estão listados em bolsa e que estão pautados a um processo necessário de integridade da cadeia da proteína. Nós estamos em curso bastante avançado para fazer o rastreio de toda a cadeia animal, da proteína animal do estado do Pará, para que nós possamos mostrar que é possível, portanto, preservar a vocação pecuária, intensificar a produção para que não haja expansão do uso da terra, não precisamos derrubar uma árvore sequer para continuar produzindo proteína, continuar gerando emprego nesta atividade, mas que nós possamos conciliar estas iniciativas.
E, governador, eu estou bem consciente aqui do nosso tempo, a conversa está boa, então a gente tem que concluir, mas eu não queria deixar de fazer uma pergunta que é, o senhor está aqui desde a semana passada, numa agenda intensa, vai estar aqui por mais alguns dias. Concluindo, qual tem sido a receptividade que o senhor tem sentido aqui para essa agenda de valorização da floresta viva e de protagonismo do Brasil e do Pará nessa seara?
Eu entendo que é a grande oportunidade do Brasil. O Brasil não pode perdê-la. O Brasil está, como diriam os mais jovens, na crista da onda. O Brasil é o país da vez a partir do que pode ser a sua escolha, e entendo que politicamente o nosso Brasil hoje vive uma convergência de fatores com o comprometimento do governo federal, com o comprometimento dos estados subnacionais e principalmente a mobilização da sociedade. Seja a sociedade através do terceiro setor, seja a sociedade através dos meios empresariais que compreendem que é possível a convergência deste ambiente. E nós temos 2 anos. Nós temos 2 anos para preparar o Brasil. 2 anos para que o estado do Pará se apresente como um ambiente receptivo de um estado que, num passado recente, foi o símbolo de grandes emissões, de grande desmatamento. E que, por escolha, por decisão do curso da história, faz a transição do uso do solo, implementa a transição de um modelo de economia de baixo carbono, valorizando a floresta viva, olhando pelas pessoas e se apresentando como sede da COP30. E aí, certamente, com esta convergência de agenda, o Brasil pode propor com altivez, com autoridade, com que o mundo possa receber o chamamento para essa virada e quebra de paradigma. Nós precisamos ter a clareza de que o norte global construiu um modelo ao longo da sua história que envolve economias de grandes emissões. O sul global pode representar a grande solução para uma economia de baixas emissões. Mas nós não podemos imaginar que a lógica da redução das emissões pressupõe apenas mudança de matriz energética, mudança de matriz de exploração da indústria. Nós precisamos incluir floresta no centro destas discussões. E floresta perpassa por valoração da floresta viva, perpassa por restauro para garantir com que efetivamente, a partir das metas estabelecidas, nós possamos entregar um país e um planeta que efetivamente possa ter o compromisso com a redução drástica das suas emissões, e o Estado do Pará convida a todos a participar dessa construção, deste ousado plano que lá em 2030 possa fazer com que o nosso Estado possa efetivamente, numa meta que certamente com a iniciativa privada poderá ser colocada de pé, mas que precisa ser colocada a partir de agora, a partir das concessões que estamos estruturando. No mais, queria poder convidar a todos que possam estar junto com a gente nessa caminhada até 2025 e que na COP30 nós possamos estar juntos nessa jornada de mostrar que o Pará e o Brasil lideram esta agenda a partir da mobilização da iniciativa privada e da sociedade brasileira.
Muito bom. Bom, muito obrigado, governador. Com esse chamamento a gente encerra o evento hoje. Queria agradecer a todos que estiveram aqui com a gente, agradecer muito aos nossos parceiros, a Coalizão, uma organização com tanta representatividade, o CEBDS, que tem mais de 100 grandes empresas participando por trás, está aí há 26 anos. Agradecer muito também a equipe da re.green, que se esforçou muito para fazer um grande evento, e muito obrigado novamente. Obrigado, governador. Grande prazer. Conte conosco.
Mine's like, I like to go to the gym in the morning because if I don't, like, I will not go after work.